Hello Booktube, I'm Mike and this is Riff Raff's Reading Renaissance, and today I'm reporting back, so it's Riff Raff's Reading Renaissance reading report back on Shorty September. At the beginning of Shorty September I spoke about some of the daunting choices I had as to what to read and what not to read, and things being as they may, I've read some of that list. I've read a lot of things that weren't on that list, so this is just a quick video feedback to give you a report back on all the things I've done in September. There are lots of videos already that you can see on my channel about things I've done in September, so where I've already covered books, I'll just reference them very briefly, as is the first one. For Framed in September, celebrating art, I chose to read The Girl with the Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier. I would highly recommend it. If you want to know more about it, go and check out the video. I'm not going to repeat all the things I said, but I loved it. It's got beautiful, gentle writing, and it captures the time and place of the novel brilliantly. So, highly recommended. The second event in September that I took part on is Shake-tember. And again, there's two videos, Act 1 and Act 2, if you really want to know. But the books that I read during September in order to support that was this fantastic BBC booklet called In Search of Shakespeare by Michael Wood. It's an accompanying book to the BBC television series that I cannot recommend highly enough. It was an entirely immersive experience in learning about Shakespeare, thoroughly enjoyable. Highly recommended, as you'll see if you watch the video. In terms of one of the books I did think about reading on the original Shorty September list was Bill Bryson's biography of Shakespeare, which I have read. It's a lovely book, very readable. I learnt a lot, given how Bryson's quite humble about how little we actually know about Shakespeare, but he put together a really entertaining and easy to read book. So I recommend it as an entry level to anyone who wants to know more about Shakespeare. And of course, if you want to cut the shortcut, go check out my video. The other book I identified in the original Shorty September list that I wanted to link to Shaketember was Anthony Burgess's novel, Nothing Like the Sun. I'd heard a lot about it and I wanted to read it, and I have to say, again, as you can tell in the video, it is a exquisite writing experience. He basically tells the story of Shakespeare's loves and life, but he tells it in the style that Shakespeare would tell it if Shakespeare was writing a novel today. And if that's hard to imagine, get yourself a copy and experience the absolute joy of brilliant writing. I can't recommend it highly enough. So far, I've been on a roll. I've had a really good month of reading absolutely excellent stuff. And there's even more excitement to come, because along the way, I decided to do a buddy read. And my good friend Emily at M Reads, we decided together to read Graham Greene's The Quiet American. And you can see our buddy read video coming out shortly. Keep your eyes peeled, it'll be on both channels. Emily and I had an enormous amount of fun on our buddy read video together. It's a great book, it's great writing, it's a great story, it's thought-provoking, and we had a fantastic chat. We covered everything you can imagine: the book, the author, the historical context, the characters, the two films that have been made from the book. We looked at America's role in the changing world, and in fact the change that's taking place within America itself, the whole issue of cross-cultural interaction. We had a lot of fun, and the video will be up very early in October, so keep your eyes peeled. So, the next thing that I had identified as a possible read on the list was a very short book, barely more than a pamphlet, but very important, by George Orwell on fascism and democracy. And as several of you said in the comments, there can't possibly be a more apt time than to read this. I did read it, and it was a very interesting read. It was written by Orwell in 1941, so see the context and the time. I'm reminded as we look at democracy of what Churchill said, is that democracy is the worst system of government of them all, except for all the others. And I think that sometimes one needs to be mindful of that when one criticizes. Orwell's book makes a very interesting argument that it's very easy to attack democracy, and in fact much easier to attack it than to defend it. And it gets attacked from both sides, from the fascist side and from the communist side. Remember, he's writing in 1941. He highlights the arguments that are made against democracy, that there's economic inequality, and that the money classes always end up hogging the power, the government, the media, etc., and that all government ultimately rests on force. If they are seriously menaced, all bets are off, and they revert to force, which is the argument against democracy, that it's a false freedom because it's all being held up by ultimately the backstop of force. The case he makes for democracy is about the comparative feeling of security that is enjoyed by citizens of democratic countries. The fact that you cannot be punished unless you've broken a law, the whole concept of freedom of expression, the concept that the law is above the state, not the other way around. Orwell, in fact, considers that may be an illusion, but he says it's a very important principle to keep democracy going. He also claims, Orwell being Orwell, that democracy is not enough. He wants more socialism, but he says it's better than fascism. I know a few people who might agree with that. He asked some tough questions in this book, and again, he asked them in 1941, but perhaps they're just as apt for us to ask ourselves now. He argues that countries like England, where he's writing from, would not really be able to go the fascistic route because he doesn't believe they would be able to resource a Gestapo from the local citizens. That's quite a confident statement that he may have been confident in 1941. Be interesting to recheck with him now, if one could, whether he still felt that way. He argues that people would not go that route because of the 3 centuries of secure democratic experience and because of the recently won victory in World War I and what that meant to the people of England. Yeah, that's an interesting one. One could revisit that now, and I wonder if you'd have the same views. He also argued that Churchill's soldiers in the Second World War, which was on at the time he wrote this, were fighting for England, not for socialism or for any ism, that it was actually the country that was motivating them. And he explores the concept of my country, right or wrong, and the danger that raises when the democratically elected leaders turn out to be not committed to the betterment of the country above their own ambitions. This has a slightly familiar ring to it. Can't quite put my finger on it. Anyway, it's a timely and thought-provoking read. Very short, won't take you more than 15 minutes probably, but it made me think, and I would strongly recommend it, and I'm very glad to have finally read it. It's been embarrassingly long on my list of things to read. The next one is another shorty, but it is Shorty September. This is Edith Wharton's The Reckoning. Now, where I am with Edith Wharton is I have read Ethan Frome, and I absolutely adored it. It was a bullseye right in the middle of my sweet spot, which is about imperfect characters. So I really, really liked it. I haven't read the big 2, The House of Mirth and The Age of Innocence. I will get to them. They're on the list. But given Shorty September, I thought it was a perfect opportunity to tackle Edith Wharton's short story, The Reckoning, which I did. It's an interesting short story. It deals with marriage, divorce, and social expectations of a woman, Julia Westall, who leaves her first husband for a new marriage with a second husband based on she and her new husband's progressive views of marriage, as in both parties are free to leave if their feelings change, they want to be unconstrained by the suffocating social conventions, and then the new husband decides to leave. The themes of the book are about freedom versus security, the double standards that apply across genders, the unequalness of a marriage contract, how men claim freedom but rarely extend it to women, and the fact that Julia's idealistic beliefs suddenly clash up against social realities. And I mean, the writing style is as good as you expect from Wharton. It's quiet, it's incisive, it's social critique through the personal experience of the protagonists. She writes brilliantly of their private emotions, and somehow that writing reflects on the society and the more public issues that she's tackling. The book is simultaneously both progressive in that it's sympathetic to the woman's aspiration, but it's also skeptical. This was a time when it was written that there was a lot of talk about free love, etc., etc., and this is Wharton's skeptical response to being very realistic about what was possible in the structural limitations of the time. I absolutely loved it, as I'm sure I will when I get around to reading all of Wharton's great books. The next one has been on my list forever because I have a vague memory of trying to read it at school, and I was probably too young, and I really thought I needed to give it another try, and that's Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. I read it. Spoiler alert, I didn't love it, but I'm glad I read it. It tells the story of a small Cuban fishing village and Santiago, an aging fisherman who has gone out for 84 days in a row and caught absolutely nothing. He's accompanied sometimes by a young boy called Manolin, but on the 85th day he goes out alone. He hooks a giant marlin, which you can see pictured there on the cover, and he spends 3 days and nights in a tussle, a life and death struggle with the marlin. I have to say, at this stage of the book, I had slight sort of PTSD flashbacks to Moby Dick. I've had a lot of old men and sea and big fish, maybe enough to last me a lifetime. But without a spoiler alert, the story is not a simple straight line of happy endings. It's complicated. The style, of course, as you come to hear of Hemingway, is minimalist, very direct, and I liked that. You did feel you were there. You did feel that you understood precisely what was happening. I learnt a little bit about what they call Hemingway's iceberg theory, where 20% of the iceberg is above the water level and 80% below, and therefore he only writes the 20% and lets the intelligent reader work out the 80% for themselves. It's an interesting approach. I didn't mind that at all. I suppose it makes the book a bit shorter, but there are themes in the book about things like perseverance and heroism, the mighty battle of man versus nature, and the respect that exists between the hunted and the hunter. There's isolation and connection with the old man and the connection to the boy. The whole issue of symbolism is often spoken about with this book. People talk about the marlin representing challenge and nobility, the sharks that attack the tied up marlin later in the story as fate and destruction. But reading up a little bit about it, in 1952, Ernest Hemingway dismissed all the symbolism. In an interview he gave, and I'm quoting directly from what he said here, he said about the cynicism, he said, "There isn't any. The sea is the sea. The old man is the old man. The boy is the boy. The fish is the fish. The sharks are all sharks. All the symbolism that people say is shit." Excuse my French, but that's what Mr. Hemingway said. So I'm glad I read it. As I say, I don't love it, and I have heard people say that his short stories, which are somewhere in behind me, there they are. Oh. There they are. This is the complete Ernest Hemingway short stories, because I have heard people say that in fact his short stories are a better reading experience than his novels. Time will tell. The next book I read was not on my original list because I stumbled across it at a thrift shop, and I couldn't resist because it was something I had never thought about reading, and that is the Rubáiyát of Omar Khayyám. Omar Khayyám was born in 1048 and died in 1131 at the age of 83. He was an astronomer. He's known as the astronomer poet of Persia, but he was much more an astronomer than a poet. His poetry, the Rubaiyat, was translated by Edward Fitzgerald in 1859, and the word Rubaiyat means 4-line quatrain, which describes the way the poems are actually set out. If you look at just without getting into it, you can see the 4-line. Each page of the book is a 4-line poem with beautiful and I believe original illustrations from the Fitzgerald translation. Some of them are quite dramatic. It's a very interesting read. There is some question about the authenticity of whether Omar Khayyám actually wrote it, because there are a lot of Rubaiyats around and some debate about it. But when it was translated and issued into Western Europe, it sold 2 million copies by 1890. So, it was extremely popular. Khayyam himself was not one of the mystics of the Sufis. He was a free-thinking scientist. As I said, he was an astronomer. So he was quite unpopular with the predominant religion of the Sufis of the time, and he ridiculed both their religion and their practices. In one of the reviews in 1935, I'll read off the screen here, Khayyam believes in the transmutation and transformation of the human body. He does not believe in a separate soul. If we are lucky, our bodily particles would be used in the making of a jug of wine. Khayyam took refuge in wine to ward off bitterness and to blunt the cutting edge of his thoughts. I have to say, I'm glad that critic referenced wine, because when I read this, and it's a very easy read, it's literally 4-line poems in a couple of, I don't think the pages are even numbered, but you can see it's not a big book. I was immediately struck, I don't know what I was expecting, perhaps something philosophical, but I was immediately struck about how much of these poems are actually about the here and the now, and the fact that the future is so uncertain and unto dust, etc., that we might as well enjoy a jug of wine or two in the now. I was not expecting that when I started reading this, but it was quite fetching, I have to say. As I said, the illustrations are beautiful, and I'll pick one just to show you, because I want to read on that particular page. Here is a picture. I'll do a close-up. You can see this is a beautiful drawing of a girl at a book with a ink blot having despoiled the page. And the line here, which many of you will recognize, says, "The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all thy pity nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it." It's really quite lovely. I don't know whether this should be on Poetry Thursday, but I enjoyed it. It was a totally unexpected, it was unplanned, unexpected. I enjoyed it, and I have even discovered that its popularity goes so far that 2 of our South African writers, Herman Charles Bosman and the poet C.J. Langenhoven, each did a separate translation of the Rubaiyat into Afrikaans, the local Dutch-derived language here. So, that was unexpected, but equally extremely enjoyable, and I would recommend an easy, quick read to anyone who hasn't experienced the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyám. I think that brings me to the here and now, and we're wrapping up at the end of September, so over the horizon we look to October, and I've decided I'm going to take part in Victober, which you've no doubt heard about already. There's been a lot of communications on the channels about Victober, but remember, as I always say, I'm an extremely slow reader, so Victober to me has to be very carefully thought out, and I've chosen a book that I've wanted to read for a long time and not been happy that I haven't yet, and that book is Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. This is a rather strange cover. Of all the covers I've seen of Vanity Fair, this is probably my least favorite, if I'm honest, because I don't know, unless someone tells me something I don't know, it doesn't immediately to me say very much about the environment or the nature of the story. This is the Wordsworth Classics. I like the Wordsworth Classics for their style and their economic pricing, but I must say this current range of covers leaves me a little bit cold. Maybe it's just me, doesn't matter. The book is 660 pages long, so we're back into what I would consider reasonably chunker territory. But I have a formula, as you may have heard me mention on the channel before. 25 pages a day will get me through this in less than 30 days. So that's my plan for Victober. In terms of the actual book itself, I've done a little bit of research in deciding which book to read, and I've learned that it was serialized in Punch magazine originally in 1847. It's set in England. It moves through the Low Countries of Holland and Belgium. It moves to Madras, which was curious until I realized that William Makepeace Thackeray was born in India, and to the Rhinelands of Germany. There are apparently two characters, Becky Sharp and Amelia Sedley, that we follow, two central characters. And everything I've read about Becky Sharp just makes me want to read this novel even more. Not least because Aaron at Aaron Read a Book, or Aaron Read a Book, we'll still never know, he mentioned that Vanity Fair is one of his favorites, and I'm very fond of his recommendations when it comes to the sort of old classic books that he reads. Everybody, as I say, everything I've looked at about the book makes me want to read it even more. If I turn to a book I often use called How to Be Well Read, which is just very useful, quick guides to the nature of books, I'll share two things with you here. The one is, Vanity Fair confirms the wisdom of waiting until you have a novel to write. I thought that's a good start. And then over the page, the author says, Virginia Woolf applauded Middlemarch as the first novel for grown-ups in English literature. Vanity Fair is, I think, the first middle-aged novel in English literature. That's quite interesting. Another person I tend to refer to in terms of guiding me a little bit on my journey is Anthony Burgess. I referred earlier to his fantastic Shakespeare novel, Nothing Like the Sun. But he also has this book called English Literature, in which he opines about everybody you can imagine throughout English literature. And his comments about Thackeray is that he says that Thackeray is always wrongly combined with Dickens in people's minds, whereas he believes they're entirely different. He says Dickens writes about low life with a romantic approach, whereas Thackeray writes about the upper classes with an anti-romantic approach. It sounds like fun. I'll tell you at the other end. So that's where I am. The pile is done. I've done my bit. So I want to just thank you all for the support and comments that you've made during September and even before. My subscriber count is ticking up slowly and gradually, and I'm perfectly happy with that. I didn't come into Booktube to drive algorithms. I came to share my love of reading, and perhaps to share the experiences I have along the way. So I'd love to hear from you what you read in September, be it for Shorty September, for Shaketember, Shakespeare, or for Framed, with the celebration of art. And I ask you to wish me luck as I tackle Vanity Fair for Victober. I'll keep you informed. If you're enjoying the journey with me, please like and subscribe. It does help to motivate us. And I'll see you on the other side of the book. So for now, bye-bye, Booktube.